After releasing both of my armor progression guides, I have gotten so many comments ever since asking for one on weapons. Now, originally I was a bit hesitant on this, as weapons can be very tricky and coming up with an accurate guide is very hard, but after hours of research and discussing with others, I've finally gone out and made the long-awaited video. Despite this, coming up with these guides can be quite the challenge, and answering everyone's questions is nearly impossible in a reasonable amount of time, so if you do have any further questions or comments about this video, I would highly suggest that you stop by over on my Twitch streams. The links are down in the description below. But with that being said, let's get straight into the video. Alrighty, so as you can see, today's video is going to be the long-awaited Out of Dungeons Weapons Guide. Now, I've been thinking about this video for many weeks now, and I've talked to a couple of people about it, some viewers that have come out with some suggestions for this video as well, and I've also gone out and done a little bit of my own research, and I've paired together all of my past experience with all the weapons that I'll be talking about in today's video, to hopefully bring an accurate guide for everybody who's looking to see what weapons they should buy, depending on what stage of the game that you are at. Now, before we do hop straight into the video, I'm going to be splitting this up into two different parts. The first part is going to be the main progression between what you should be buying at the very start of the game, all the way up until you are end game and you've pretty much maxed out your account. And then after that, I'll be talking about some miscellaneous, also useful weapons that don't really fit into the main progression, but are definitely very useful for specific things, and I'll get to that in the second half of the video. But without any further delay, let's hop straight into the first couple weapons that you should be buying as soon as you start out in Skyblock. So the first three weapons that I want to talk about today are going to be the Undead Sword, the End Sword, and also the Spider Sword. Now, all three of these weapons are literally 100 coins from the weapon merchant, who does live just behind this building right at the corner of the entrance of the cave. And the reason why I say you should buy all three of these weapons and not just one of them is because each one does deal 100% damage to the corresponding mob depending on what it is. So the Undead Sword obviously does 100% more damage to undead mobs, the End Sword to end mobs, and then the Spider Sword to just spider related mobs. And early on, you should not be stressing about getting any crazy damage or sort of maxing out a weapon or really enchanting things and doing stuff like that, because early on all you need is a couple of weapons to help you clear out the mobs on your island and maybe get your combat levels up a little bit as you are focusing on coins. Because as long as you are earning some coins early on and also working on things like your fairy souls, the damage will come off of your talismans, your skills, and other things. So getting anything that's really useful for just killing random mobs is going to be your best bet, and these three swords do it very well at a very affordable price. Now, the next two weapons that I have in my inventory here are going to be the Raider Axe and the Aspect of the End. Now, this is when things start to get a little bit beefier. Maybe you've gotten your first million coins right now. You've probably got a couple of minions at this point. Maybe your skill average is also going up slowly but surely. And maybe you're getting to the stage where you are able to go to the end and try out to one-shot zealots. If this sounds like you, then the Raider's Axe, I would say, is probably the better option over the Aspect of the End, but the Aspect of the End is one that you want to buy regardless of any weapon that you're going to be maining, because this is going to carry you all the way up until the end of the game. I still use this weapon to this day, even though I have some of the best weapons that are on this list, and this Aspect of the End can be upgraded later on when you are super rich and have higher requirements. So I would definitely recommend you buy this weapon, even if you're not going to use it for left-click damage, as the Raider Axe is probably better for that job. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about why these weapons are good or what's super beneficial about them, but I will talk about pricing throughout the entirety of this video. And to keep things simple, this random Raider's Axe that I bought off the auction house, not even from the Viking NPC, was only about 165,000 coins, and it already came with a couple of kills and some random stuff on it. And the Aspect of the End is around 175,000 coins, also off the auction house. So overall, pairing these two weapons together isn't going to cost you any more than 350-ish thousand coins, and they're both great options to start out early on in the game when you are sort of picking things up and trying to one-shot certain mobs. Now, the next weapon up on this list is none other than the Aspect of the Dragons. Now, this definitely is a very sweet upgrade from the Raider Axe, and it's definitely when you start to see some increased damage and is the point of the game where your weapons really start to mean something. Now, the aspect of the dragons at the time of me recording this video is only about 800,000 coins. And because it's so cheap and so affordable, some people are actually able to skip the Raider's Axe entirely and go straight for the aspect of the dragons. But obviously, if you are following a sort of a set progression, that is quite the drastic jump. So most people will probably buy the Raider Axe first and then go for the AOTD afterwards. The beauty about this weapon as well is that it does have some pretty strong capabilities inside of early game dungeons. But I'll save all the dungeon weapons for a separate video, and I'll make a separate dungeons weapon guide, hopefully in the following weeks. But to keep things short, Aspect of the Dragons, very good mid-tier weapon, and I do highly suggest that you pick one up when you are progressing through Skyblock. Now, the next weapon up on the list here is going to be the Zombie Soldier Cutlass. Now, the reason why I haven't bought one here is because I want to stress something really important before any of you guys decide to go out and buy a weapon like this. Now, because the Zombie Soldier Cutlass is a very common dungeon drop, when you are looking for a perfect quality epic one, as you can see down the bottom, this says that it has a 50% base stat boost and it was obtained on floor 6. But if you don't have the required Skyblock mods and you see another Zombie Soldier Cutlass that looks like this one here, if you couldn't already tell, this one's actually been recombobulated, and there's a high chance it was due to an auto recombobulator, and it actually does not have the same 50% base stat boost, but it was obtained on a higher floor. Now, price wise, both of these weapons are very similar, although the recombobulated one in this case does do more damage. But I figured before I do start talking about this weapon, I feel like a lot of my audience may not have already known that. So when you are buying these weapons that could be auto recommed, be very careful to make sure you buy a proper epic one and not a rare one that's just been upgraded by a talisman. But with that being said, the reason why the Zombie Soldier Cutlass is on the list here is because at this stage of the game, you should have already been able to reach around Catacombs 5. Hopefully, most of these weapons here are Catacombs 5, and if you can't use an epic one, you can just stick to a rare one, as the rare ones still are very useful and provide lots of damage. But the main kicker to the Zombie Soldier Cutlass on every single one that you can see here is that it does have 100% bonus attack speed. Now, the damage and strength outside of dungeons is definitely a downgrade from the aspect of the dragons, but the damage and strength inside of dungeons is significantly higher, and assuming that you do just prefer bonus attack speed or you prefer doing in-dungeons things, and you see yourself running more dungeons than other people would, then the Zombie Soldier Cutlass might actually be a better choice than the AOTD, because it has slightly different benefits to it that aren't just raw damage and raw strength. Now, next up on the list here, of course, I had to bring in the Livid Dagger and the Flower of Truth. Now, the ongoing debate of whether you should buy the Livid or whether you should buy the Flower of Truth has been happening for many months now, and people have non-stop been arguing over the Flower of Truth being better, the Livid Dagger being better, or which one you should go out and buy. Now, like I always say, you should always just follow your gut and pick the one that personally suits you best. Some people prefer having the 100% attack speed from the Livid Dagger, other people prefer to have the higher single target damage that the Flower of Truth might have depending on your stats, or others just want to have that ability that the Flower of Truth has where it shoots out a rose that ricochets between enemies, or you just want to have a weapon with higher strength. Whatever the case may be, I'm not going to tell you which one you should pick. If you want to, you can go out and buy both depending on how much money you actually have. They're both very functional in their own ways and both have pretty similar requirements. The Flower of Truth actually has no requirements at all, while the Livid Dagger only has the floor 5 completion. But aside from that, the Livid is a little bit more expensive and arguably a lot more powerful. But once again, it comes down to personal preference, and just choose the one that suits you best. Now, another semi-underrated weapon that I want to talk about at this stage of the game is actually going to be the Fell Sword. Now, the Fell Sword is really cheap, and I believe the last time I tested this with a pretty maxed out one that a viewer actually lent me, it was doing more damage than this Livid Dagger, and this Livid Dagger is pretty maxed out. 5-starred, recombobulated, it has really good enchants on it, and it's fuming hot potatoed. And despite that, a half maxed out Fell Sword that wasn't fuming and didn't have all tier 6 enchants was out damaging the Livid Dagger, and it provides a lot of useful healing benefits to the healer class. Now, the only reason why I wouldn't recommend this too much to too many players is because this weapon has higher requirements, being Catacombs 20. And ultimately, people do prefer having the bonus attack speed from the Liver Dagger anyways, and the single target damage isn't as helpful. But I just wanted to bring this weapon to light once again, as it is very underrated and has got some incredible capabilities. And the Fell Sword should definitely not be ignored, as it could suit some people. Now from here on out, this is the stage of the video where things get a lot more interesting. This is when you start to really leave mid-game and sort of progress into early and mid-late game. And weapon upgrades become very expensive and are also very dungeon oriented. Now, I am going to leave a full dungeons weapon progression guide for a later video down the line, but if we just pretend to ignore the dungeon weapons for the time being and just focus on what's good outside of dungeons, and we act like the requirements and stuff don't really exist, the weapon that I would say should upgrade from here on out is going to be the Giant Sword. Now, as you can see, the cheapest clean Giant Sword on the auction house right now is about 117 million coins, and a lot of these are very expensive, although I definitely don't recommend buying any of these weird ones that have enchants on them, because what you want to do with the Giant Sword is pair it with the One For All enchantment. Now, the Giant Sword has some of the highest left click damage in the entire game, and it has got some very versatile uses inside and outside of dungeons as well. So at this stage, if you choose to, you can upgrade from the Liver Dagger to a Giant Sword, although a lot of people would still prefer the bonus attack speed, or they value the Lifesteal or Siphon enchantment. So if you are somebody who still wants to stick with a Liver Dagger, you definitely can, but the Giant Sword is an option for a lot of people, and it's one that I would certainly recommend. And now we get to proper late game here. So this is the stage of the game where now you have a lot of money, you are probably running floor 7, maybe some master mode floors, and things are looking a lot more interesting. And if you haven't seen it this entire time, I am talking about any Necron Blade variant. Now for me personally, I use a Scylla, and I use a Scylla for various reasons, but ultimately the Necron Blade that you choose is entirely personal preference, as long as you are fully aware of what each one does and the benefits behind the abilities of every Necron Blade. That's going to allow you to pick out the one that suits you the best for your playstyle. And every single Necron Blade pretty much acts the same way in various aspects, with some minor changes here and there. I would give you guys a brief rundown of what each Necron Blade is actually good for and the various pros and cons for all 4 of them, but that would drag out the video for too long, so if you do have any questions about that, you can always leave a comment below and I will try my best to respond to them. Or you can also tune into my Twitch streams when I am live, or just join my Discord and ask me over there. Now, the final weapon that I would class as definitely the end-all be-all best weapon in the entire game would have to be just the simple Emerald Blade. Now, the Emerald Blade itself is not what makes this weapon so powerful. It's the user and the amount of money that you do have in your purse. Now, I would never recommend that you go out and try to main an Emerald Blade. It just isn't reliable and there's not really much to it. But if you are super rich and you get to the stage where you have probably 1 billion coins in your purse or some insane amounts of money, the Emerald Blade does do the highest damage in the entire game. And with the right setup, the Emerald Blade is absolutely busted. But it's not something that I would definitely go out and go for. I would just stick to using a Necron's Blade and some of the other miscellaneous weapons that I'll talk about in a minute. But it's still good to keep in mind that this weapon does exist. Now, another end-all be-all final weapon for the end game has definitely got to be the Terminator. Now, the Terminator is used inside of high-level dungeon gameplay, although it doesn't really have that great of a use outside of dungeons, which is the main reason why I don't really recommend it either, because you aren't going to run around just bowing random mobs all the time. That being said, it is still an endgame weapon, and it's very expensive for good reason. So I've put it on this list really just to acknowledge it, but once again, I wouldn't recommend using it outside of dungeons. And now that I've covered the main progression for the weapons you should be buying outside of dungeons, I'm going to cover all the miscellaneous weapons now, and the weapons that you should probably just have, as they aren't going to get too much use all the time, but they will come in handy depending on what you choose to do in this game. Now, first up on this list is going to be any of the Slayer weapons. Now, the one that I wouldn't suggest buying would be the Pooch Sword, as the Pooch Sword is super situational, and because most people don't actually use Mastiff, this weapon is kind of useless in most situations and just isn't as great. But the katanas, on the other hand, for all the Enderman Slayer, are crucial for doing Enderman Slayer efficiently. They really are only good for Enderman Slayer, and when you pair them with One For All, they are very good at it. And alternatively, you could use a Scorpion Foil to do spiders easier if your Liver Dagger or other weapons aren't good enough. Or you could use a Reaper Falchion for Revenants, or an Axe of the Shredded if you are rich enough, as these will also help you with a lot of Slayers too. Now, another miscellaneous weapon, or should I say weapons that I want to get on this list, has definitely got to be just any other cheaper one-for-all alternative. Now, as you guys know before, I did talk about the one-for-all giant sword being a really powerful single target weapon. However, if you aren't rich enough for one, you can definitely opt out for a Shadow Fury instead. The Shadow Fury, from what I know, is really good with the one-for-all enchantment, and so is other things like the Reaper Scythe. And the Reaper Scythe is also another weapon that is really good with the one-for-all enchantment. The reason why I don't put these ones in the main progression is because the Liver Dagger just has that 100% bonus attack speed, which is super helpful for taking out bosses. And if one for all is something that definitely suits you more than, say, the Liver Dagger and its high attack speed, then in that case, a one for all weapon is probably a better option, which is why I put it in the miscellaneous category, because it's not really for everyone. Now, next up on the list here, we have some very important dungeon weapons. Now, this includes the Withercloak Sword, the Bonzo Staff, Florid Zombie Sword, and the Ice Spray Wand. Now, these all depend heavily on what you run in dungeons, how frequently you run dungeons, how much money you have, and a lot of other factors. But to keep things short, the Withercloak Sword is unreal for being able to lava hop inside of floor 7. It's almost required in any run that you decide to do, as this will save you in so many situations. The Bonzo Staff is incredible for mobility and just makes getting around the place really easy, especially inside of dungeons, but it could be useful outside as well. The Florid Zombie Sword, or the Ornate Zombie Sword, whichever one you're able to afford, is super good for burst healing. If you're doing Slayer bosses, or you're doing dungeons, or really anything that does do a lot of damage to you, I highly suggest picking one of these bad boys up, as it's going to be very helpful just in any part of the game. And last but not least, the Ice Spray Wand is very nice for stunning mobs, whether that be inside dungeons, whether it be outside if you really needed it. The Ice Spray Wand is very helpful and versatile to pair with other weapons, but it isn't required and doesn't really sit with the main progression. For the second last set of weapons that I do have on this list, it's pretty much just going to be any bow you can get your hands on. Whether that be the Runan's bow or the Juju short bow, any bow that you are able to pick up and just use outside of dungeons is going to benefit you quite a lot. Especially for things like dragons, you do want to have a bow at the ready, just so you're actually able to shoot the dragon and do a little bit of damage. Bows do have some other helpful uses outside of dungeons, like killing the mobs for the Slayer quests, and also doing the commissions in the Dwarven Mines, although people normally stick to something like the Flower of Truth for this kind of thing, as the Flower of Truth can be spammed a lot quicker and bows aren't as great. But nonetheless, having a bow that does do some kind of decent range damage is helpful, because you never know when you might need one. And now last but not least, the final weapons that I do have on this list have just got to be any of the event weapons for whatever that may be. Now, not many people do Jerry events, spooky festivals, or anything of the sorts, but if there's any weapon out of this little list I have here that I would recommend you get, it would be the Soul Whip, as the Soul Whip can be good for room clearing in dungeons. There's a couple of other uses that it does have, but it comes without saying that the Frosty the Snow Blaster is very good for the Jerry event, and if you are a lower level player and you still want to do spooky somewhat efficiently, the Ghoul Buster and the Pumpkin Launcher can be pretty helpful for that. If you do choose to use a Ghoul Buster in these spooky festivals, make sure you get the Fast Reforge for that extra attack speed, but you don't really need to enchant it or put any damage stats on it, because it's not really useful for anything other than the spooky mobs. But with all of that finally being said, that's going to wrap up everything that I had for today's video. Now, hopefully you did find this useful or informative in some way, and hopefully this does guide you throughout your Skyblock progression when it comes to buying weapons. Now, if you do find anything in this video that you would like to comment on, or you think that I said wrong, maybe you have some different opinions, or maybe you'd like to clear up some things that I may not have explained in this video, be sure to leave it down in the comment section below. I'm always open for discussion and constructive criticism, as making these guides is really difficult and hard to get accurate. I know I've said this a lot already, but if you do also have any other questions and you just want to reach out to me in a different situation, I do stream live over on Twitch every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I do also have a Discord server that you can join to ask me questions wherever it may be. And I'm always happy to help with any of these kinds of videos, as my goal is just to help out other players. But with all that being said, that's going to wrap up everything that I had for today's video. And as always, take care and peace. No way, bro. Ayo, man. I'll take it, dude. I'll take it. Free money, bro. Free money with a chestplate, boys. With a chestplate. No way, no way, no way. Second with a chestplate. Let's go. Let's. Not a hand.